Copyright disclaimer, under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purpose such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statutes that might otherwise be infringing. Non-profit, educational or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Hello Internet, welcome to Film Theory, and okay, I did this show like, twice already? Third time in a row, it's not gonna get funnier. Before I properly start this video, how was your Christmas? You know, Christmas was yesterday, and, I have a child now. My sister insisted on naming it Gabble, so this is Gabble. He's not a new mascot, because no one can replace Walter. But anyways, we get to finally talk about Columbo's wife, Mrs. Columbo. Now, of course, with any video, I should really give y'all a quick recap. Well, not quick. It's just more of a who Columbo is before we get into who his wife is and how she had a TV show. Columbo is an American crime drama television series starring Peter Falk as Lieutenant Columbo, a homicide detective with the LA Police Department. After two pilot episodes in 1968 and 1971, the show originally aired on NBC from 1971 to 1978 as one of the rotating programs of the NBC Mystery Movie. Columbo then aired on ABC as a rotating program on the ABC Mystery Movie from 1989 to 1990, and on a less frequent basis from 1990 to 2003, which, that's when the show ended. But that's besides the point. Columbo is a shrewd and exceptionally observant homicide detective whose trademarks include his rumpled beige coat, unassuming demeanor, cigar, old Pugin 403 car. Oh, that's what his car is? You know, I actually do like his car. I think it's cute. But besides those things, he also loves chili and has a wife who we never see, but he always mentions. Stick a pin in that, we'll get back to her later. He often leaves a room only to return with the catchphrase, "Just one more thing," to ask a critical question. The character and the show was created by Richard Levinson and William Link. They popularized the inverted detective story format, sometimes referred to as a how catch 'em. This genre begins by showing you guys, who the criminal is, why they're doing the crime, how they commit the crime, and that's it. The plot, therefore, doesn't really have a whodunit, because, that doesn't really make it fun. What makes it fun is how we get to see it, but the fun part of it is seeing how Columbo finds out that the person did it, because we know they did it, but we want to know how Columbo's gonna find out. Another thing about the show is that each episode are between 70 to 98 minutes long, making them literally an hour-long episode, and they have been broadcasted in 44 countries. The show has been described by the BBC as timeless and remains popular today. I'm not gonna completely get into the history of the show, but I do want to add two more things to this. One, that a few years before his death, Peter Falk expressed interest in returning to the role of Columbo. In 2007, he claimed he had chosen a script for one last Columbo episode called Columbo Hear No Evil. The script was renamed to Columbo's Last Case, and ABC unfortunately denied the project. In response, producers for the series announced they were attempting to shop the project to form production companies. But then Peter Falk was diagnosed with dementia in late 2007, and during a 2009 trial over his care, physician Stephen Red stated that Peter Falk's condition had deteriorated so badly that he could no longer remember playing a character named Columbo, nor could he identify Columbo. He then unfortunately passed away on June 23rd, 2011, at the age of 83, which is a bit impressive considering all the other things he was in before. Notable thing being in a Jack Lemmon movie called Love. The second thing I'd like to mention is that they've had a lot of guest stars that were famous people, and some actors appeared more than once, playing different characters each time. The two that I know the most are Jack Cassidy and Robert Culp, but the other ones include William Shatner, and Tim O'Connor, and Patrick McGoohan, and George Hamilton. Who's that? I don't know who that is, but But a lot of these people really wanted to be in Columbo. Even ladies wanted to be in Columbo, like Tyron Dolly. She loved being in Columbo. And who could forget Dean Stock? Well, I forgot what he... I've never seen any of the things he was in, but apparently he used to be a child actor before he became a full-blown actor, I guess so. Before we talk about the TV show, it's important to talk about Mrs. Columbo. Mrs. Columbo is a character that we've never seen, but we do hear about. She was especially mentioned in an episode called Goodbye Columbo, I think? It was an episode about Columbo's wife dying, but we knew she wasn't dead, and Columbo just staged the whole thing to, catch the bad guy and stuff like that. But it begs the question, is she real? He makes up a lot of stuff about his life. I'm not really too sure what's real and what's not real. And, well, I found an article from ColumboFile.com that solves that question, which funnily enough mentions the Mrs. Columbo show that I don't really want to get into right now. We're not talking about that yet, so we'll just first talk about the early years. You see, for as long as we've known Columbo, he's been talking about his wife. As far back as Prescription Murder, he recounts how she gives him a pencil every day, which he always goes on to lose. We learn that she thinks he's forgetful, and that she'd prefer it if he smoked a pipe instead of cigars. When Columbo returned to the screens in 1971, the homely anecdotes about his wife stayed with him, but many of these were broad and could have been applied to anyone at all, in keeping with the potentially fictional character whom Columbo simply referred as a means of lulling his quarry into underestimating him. Levinson and Link wanted Columbo to be a mysterious figure, so it was entirely possible initially that Mrs. Columbo was a figment of his imagination. She certainly could have been fictional when season 1 of the series proper kicked off in late 1971. Like I said before, Levinson and Link in particular seem to be of the opinion that Columbo simply made up references about his wife to suit whatever conversation he was having at the time. In their minds, Columbo was more likely to be a bachelor who lived alone and was married to his work. I mean, he never wears a wedding ring. Like I mentioned before, they wanted him to be a mysterious figure. Where'd he come from? Where'd he go? Where'd he come from? Okay, no, I'm not even gonna... I'm sorry. My point is that we don't know anything about Columbo, so it was entirely possible that, Mrs. Columbo is up there. Even characters within the show seem vaguely distrustful of the lieutenant's tales of his wife. In Ransom for a Dead Man, Leslie Williams chaffs Columbo about his bag of shop-worn tricks, including the seeming absent-mindedness, the homey anecdotes about the family, the wife. However, Mrs. Columbo soon took on a life of her own. Levinson and Link only wrote one episode of season 1, Death Lends a Hand, instead of having their hands on full with production duties. This allowed other writers to put their imprint on the series, and it's all this stage that Mrs. Columbo starts feeling a whole lot more real. I, the person who wrote this, not me, believe that when season 1 first aired, none of Falk, Levinson, and Link had decided whether Mrs. Columbo really existed or not. Maybe it didn't even matter. But then along came Lady in Waiting, the 5th episode of the first season, and all of a sudden the references to her ring entirely true. Chatting to Peter Hamilton at the bar, Columbo mentions how his wife has a proverb for every situation, and during an argument between them, she accused him of putting the cart before the horse. This proved to be a light bulb moment for Columbo in cracking the Beth Chadwick case, where he himself had put the evidential cart before the horse. This was a recount of a very authentic and very human encounter, one too personalized to have been made up on the spot. From this point on, Mrs. Columbo increasingly becomes a fleshed out character, too real to be simply part of a Columbo's psyche, unless of course he's certifiable, which we all know isn't the case. A further example that strengthens the argument for Mrs. Columbo's existence comes in Short Fuse, when the lieutenant recounts that his wife believes he's the second best cop in the LAPD. behind 80 other guys tied for first. It's a sweet anecdote that seems entirely grounded in reality. Let's move on to season 2. In season 2, Columbo chats to a car mechanic named Mike in Etude in Black about how his wife's car is something special. It's just for transportation. Columbo has nothing to gain by referencing his wife to Random Joe, proving a clear signal that she's a legit character. Similarly, in Requiem for a Falling Star, the lieutenant rings home to let his wife know that he's hanging out with Nora Chandler. Even though Mrs. Columbo is out shopping for fish, Columbo chats animatedly to his brother-in-law George, who also speaks to Nora. So there was definitely someone on the other end of the line who seems to know Columbo and his wife.
Get to the fucking point, Amy. Where exactly is the proof of her existence?
I'm getting to that, Walter. Even though the viewers haven't seen her yet, Mrs. Columbo becomes more... Sorry, I have to take care of my Tamagotchi for a minute. Sorry guys, gaggle needed my attention. But anyways, what was I saying? Oh yeah, even though the viewer hasn't seen her yet, we haven't seen her and the show has been over for a long time, Mrs. Columbo becomes more real with every episode that passes. Yet, it's not until season 4 that we can absolutely say that she's a genuine article. Consider the conversation Columbo has with her on the phone from Gene Stafford's office in An Exercise of Fatality. There's no one else with him, and the call has no bearing on the case. It's simply a husband ringing his wife to discuss dinner plans. Again, we'd have to consider Columbo mad to be doing this if she's not even real. Far more definitive proof comes in Troubled Waters. Mrs. Columbo has won the couple a cruise at the church raffle, and she's definitely aboard the ship, as testified by Captain Gibbons and Purser Watkins, who both report having seen her at different stages of the episode. Unless there was some sort of mass hallucination taking place, even the most doubting Thomas cannot safely believe in Mrs. Columbo's existence. Just as conclusively, ace spy Nelson Brenner has bugged the Columbo's home in Identity Crisis. When the lieutenant reveals that Madame Butterfly is his wife's favorite piece of music, Brenner roars back, "I know!" He'd have no reason to say if that wasn't true or not. We also must remember how he had that new coat Mrs. Columbo gifted him, and now you see him. Columbo couldn't think of the... I'll be right back. Now, I'd like to talk about Mrs. Columbo, but we will get back to this episode, like this article. We will get back to this article later. Okay, keep this in mind. Mrs. Columbo, later called Kate Columbo, Kate the Detective, and Kate Loves a Mystery, is an American crime drama television series, initially based on the wife of Lieutenant Columbo, the title character from the television series Columbo. It was created and produced by Richard Allen Simmons and Universal Television for NBC, and stars Kate Mulgrew as a news reporter helping to solve crimes while raising her daughter. The series debuted in February 1979 as a spin-off to Columbo, focusing on his wife, who was never given a first name in the original show, but was named Kate in the series. After poor ratings and reception from both audiences and the original producers of the show, as well as Peter Falk, we'll get to that later, both the series and the eponymous character herself were renamed in an attempt to change direction, but this did not help the ratings, and the series ended with just a run of 13 episodes. Neither Peter Falk nor the character of Lieutenant Columbo ever appeared on the show. The series overview claims that Kate Columbo, later renamed Kate Callahan after an off-screen divorce, is the wife of Lieutenant Columbo, the title character from the show Columbo, and she's a news reporter who solves crimes while raising her daughter. I did not realize Columbo had children, but then again, he's always talking about his family, but I don't know if Jenny is canon. That's her name, by the way, Jenny. Shortly after the Columbo series ended its original run on NBC in 1978, despite objections from the Columbo creator and producers Richard Levinson and William Link, NBC executive Fred Silverman went forward in producing Mrs. Columbo as a spin-off to the original series. Levinson and Link further objected to Silverman's insistence on casting someone young to play the part. Kate Mulgrew was only 24 years old when the show made its debut. The information NBC released about the show was ambiguous that Mrs. Columbo in the new series was the previously unseen wife frequently mentioned on Columbo. The show received poor ratings, and as part of efforts to revamp it, the linkage between this Kate Columbo and the Mrs. Columbo of the original television series was reduced. The name of the character was changed to Kate Callahan after an off-screen divorce, and the series was renamed Kate the Detective at the beginning of the second season, followed by Kate Loves a Mystery. There was evidently some confusion over what the new title would be, since the first episode of season 2, Ladies of the Afternoon, was listed in guides as an episode of Kate the Detective, while ads called the show Kate Loves a Mystery. The revamped series also introduced the character Sergeant Mike Varick of the Valley Municipal Police Department, played by Don Strode. In its first incarnation, the producers completed their retreat from the show's original premise, and Kate Callahan was then regarded as being a completely different character from Mrs. Columbo of Columbo. Kate's ex-husband was now named Philip. Lieutenant Columbo was previously shown to have a first name Frank in the 1971 Columbo episode Dead Weight. None of the changes aided the show's ratings, however, and the show was then canceled in 1979 December. One last episode, though, called The 13th, did air in March of 1980. By the way, about Columbo's name and everything, I made a whole video about it. I just wanted to point that out. So, the series absolutely bombed. Peter Falk described the show as being disgraceful, and viewers gave it a wide berth. Realizing the error of their ways too late, NBC attempted to, distance the show, like I said, but despite the best attempts of the show to be considered canonical, even showing the lieutenant's clapped out pigway in the driveway of her home in the opening titles, Mrs. Columbo must never be regarded as having any genuine in-universe connections to Columbo. And when the lieutenant himself returned to screens in 1989, still happily married to his dear wife, any lingering doubts as to whether Kate Mulgrew could be considered to be the actual Mrs. Columbo were firmly put to bed. We still didn't see her, but she was real enough to have Vivian Dimitri try to kill her in the episode I mentioned before called Rest in Peace, Mrs. Columbo, while a dog groomer in Caution Murder Can Be Hazardous to Your Health mentions taking direct instructions from her on a pedicure for dog. Columbo's dog. Yeah, he named it dog. He's clever. Hopefully, the above evidence should be enough for any doubter to now fully get on board the Mrs. Columbo's real bandwagon, and Peter Falk certainly came to believe in her, even if he wasn't sure way back when Columbo first hit the screens. In a 1999 interview with James Lipton on the long-running U.S. interview show Inside the Actor's Studio, Peter Falk was asked whether Columbo's wife and relatives were mere fantasies. His response was emphatic. "Oh, no, all the people exist. Case closed? I think so." As a final aside, much as I think it was the right thing to keep Mrs. Columbo in an off-screen capacity, I do believe there could have been an appropriate and subtle way to include her in a fitting finale to the entire Columbo saga. Of course, Peter Falk longed to film one last Columbo episode in the mid-2000s in order to give closure to the character. Wouldn't it have been wonderful for the very final scene to have a retiring lieutenant be interrupted from a farewell conversation by his car pulling into the shop behind and the horn being beeped? "Oh, you'll have to excuse me, that's my wife," Columbo would say. "She's taking me out to dinner and her car's in the garage. She's driving mine." He would then proceed to turn and amble towards the car, where we would see an indistinct woman sitting behind the wheel. The camera focused just too soft to pinpoint her looks. As the screen faded to black, I tell ya, there wouldn't be a dry eye in the universe. But that's the whole video. Let me know what you guys think about Mrs. Columbo. I'd like to point out one more thing before I end the video. Peter Falk's real wife was actually in some episodes of Columbo, so technically we have seen Mrs. Columbo on screen. We've seen Peter Falk's wife in a couple of episodes. I think Editing Amy will pop up what episode she's been in, but I just wanted to say that before I end off the video. The next video will be about Supernatural. I got a bone to pick with them, but that's besides the point. I'll see you guys in the next video, and have a happy holidays. Well, actually, Christmas was yesterday.